Hey everyone, welcome to the DollarsAndSense Podcast, and today we are going to be talking about a topic that we are very passionate about because it's the election season, or at least post-election season, and that is the NCMP scheme in Singapore. And joining me today to discuss this topic is none other than Dinesh from our editorial team. Dinesh, welcome to the show.
Yep, great to be here. I'm not really an expert, but I think post-elections we are all passionate about politics, so not an expert, but armchair observer for sure.
A lot of people are talking about Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and his new cabinet that has just been announced. But we want to talk about something which I think less people are focusing on, which is the NCMP scheme.
NCMP, right? Non-constituency Member of Parliament, so NCMP, I think from our background research, it was introduced in 1984 by, Lee Kuan Yew, I believe. So he amended the Constitution and Parliamentary Elections Act, allowing a minimum of three opposition MPs.
Right.
Yeah. At the time, I believe there was already one, so two more.
The Election Act essentially, or rather the requirement is that you cannot have fewer than 12 opposition MPs in Parliament.
Yep.
Right. So how it works with reference to GE 2025 is that because the Workers' Party has already won 10 seats, which is 5 seats in Aljunied GRC,
Yes.
4 at Sengkang GRC, and 1 at Hougang SMC. So that's 10 seats already. So there needs to be another 2 more opposition MP, which will then be filled in from the NCMP candidates.
So NCMP is like the best losers.
Basically,
they've been called that. So best losers. So they lost by the least margin.
Yeah. Which in this election, it's actually Jalan Kayu, which will be taken by Andre Loh, Eileen Chong from the Tampines team. Because that's a GRC, so they appoint somebody, or they can choose any of the 5 candidates there, right? Just to note also, NCMP schemes is not eligible for the ruling party, which is the PAP government, because it is only meant to be offered to opposition MP.
Yeah.
So if a PAP candidate marginally lost, they are not eligible to be part of parliament through the NCMP scheme.
Yeah, I think when it was introduced, it's meant to introduce more opposition. So that's why, right?
Correct. Unless, of course, one day the PAP is the opposition or doesn't form the government anymore. When I think of the NCMP scheme, I can't help but feel that it is sort of seen by some people as undemocratic. From my perspective, no matter how much you win, or even if you win a little bit, you get into parliament, right? Because you are elected and you are in parliament and you represent the people that voted for you, whether it's a GRC or an SMC. By the same token, I can't help but feel that even if you lose well, like you were so close, like 49% of the vote, a loss is still a loss. And, why is it in my mind that, it's undemocratic? Because yes, you might have lost a little bit, but you are still in parliament through the NCMP. So what are your thoughts on that?
And so I went to do a little bit of research as well. And, while doing this research, I found it was introduced in 1984. The argument was that, the younger Singaporeans, at least in 1984, had never seen like an opposition intense parliament, right? I think there was a great stranglehold on the parliament by the PAP.
Yep.
And the first opposition only came into parliament in 1981 through a by-election, right? So before then...
And that was JB...
Yes, I think quite popular, the most popular. I think he was Workers' Party as well, right?
Yeah, Workers' Party.
Yeah. So he was the first opposition in parliament, and before then, there was a stranglehold, right? So from what I read, it was already in the works.
But it was introduced only after JB Jeyaretnam won the election at Anson, right?
At Anson.
Right.
Yeah. This allowed for, at the start, 3 NCMPs. So he was already one in there. So it would allow 2 more at the next election.
Okay.
Which would happen at the end of 1984.
Right.
So interestingly, the other argument was that, because Singaporeans had never seen this divisive opposition in parliament.
Is the word divisive? I mean, I'm just wondering.
I mean, there are 2 sides, right?
It's just an alternative voice, right?
Yeah, so they've never seen the alternative then. Maybe the younger generation had never seen the alternative, whereas at least it was in the quotes that in the 50s and 60s, it was very different. The formative years of Singapore's independence, the parliament looked very different.
Right.
And because of the stranglehold PAP had, the younger voters, maybe even the younger MPs, had never debated, had never had a chance, to debate their ideas, their views, put their points across.
Which is a stark contrast to the pre-independence or even in the 1965 post-independence pre-independence where it's very divisive and you have different parties.
And you really had to put your points across strongly, make your points well known.
Right. So I guess that's how the NCMP scheme came about.
Yeah. And there's criticism on both camps when it was introduced also. I did a little bit more reading on that.
What's those criticisms?
So from the opposition side, right, because it was a new scheme, understandably they were quite suspicious of it, finding it, maybe as a ploy to dissuade people from voting opposition. because then, they'll say even if your guy loses, he still gets into parliament. So that was their thought process anyway. And also I think some of the MPs said, it's not fair maybe for someone who's not elected to just go into parliament,
which was my initial point, right?
Correct.
It doesn't feel like very democratic that somebody who didn't win his election got it.
And it was the scheme itself was so divisive that, when the 1984 elections were held, there were 2 oppositions elected. Okay. So there was one more under the NCMP scheme that could get in, right?
Minimum of 3.
Minimum of 3. And there were 2 eligible candidates. That's what I'm trying to say. 2 eligible best losers.
Right. Because it was a GRC, is it? Or?
I'm not sure how it happened, but I believe, there's also a certain threshold you have to hit.
Okay.
I believe it was 15% or so, but I'm not 100% sure.
We'll probably need to do some research.
Yeah, I think you have to hit that 15% at least.
Right.
And then there were 2 eligible ones, and both of them did not take it up.
They choose not to accept the role.
Yeah.
Is it? So they were offered, but they choose not to accept.
Correct.
Which is actually the next part I'm trying to get at, right? Which is that should Singaporeans even expect the NCMP candidates, or is it fair to expect the NCMP candidates to accept the role? And here's my analogy, right? Let's say somebody takes part in the election and he wins the election. Obviously, he should expect to take up the MP role because that's what you were playing for, right? But I don't think it is necessarily the same when you're being offered the NCMP role, because that is in a way, it's not the job that you wanted to go for, right? So I got an analogy here, right? It's a bit like you want to apply for a full-time leadership role at a company, a full-time job, right? Maybe as a department head, for example. So you go through the interviews, you are a candidate people like, and then you almost got it, but in the end, they choose someone else over you, right? But then the company says, they come back to you, and then the company says to you, hey, actually you did a good job, right? So we can't offer you the HOD role, the head of department role, but we want you to join us as, maybe an intern or a trainee, right? With the pay being significantly, we'll talk about the pay, it's significantly different from that of a full-time MP, also because the responsibilities are different.
Correct.
Sure, some people may accept it, but is it really the obligation of the person to accept it?
I think we have to go into the salary as well, but I want to say first that there are some minor differences with the power or voting rights that they have as well.
Okay, but you use the word minor.
There's some minor ones. I have some of it listed here already. I guess everyone can decide whether it's minor or very major. So they're allowed to vote on many things, most things.
Yep.
But what I see is that they are not allowed to vote in Parliament on any motion relating to amendments in Constitution, supply bill, supplementary supply bill, final supply bill, money bills.
Yep.
Vote of no confidence in the government, and removing the president from office.
Yeah, it's the same for the nominated MP as well, NMP.
Yeah.
They can't vote on these things because they are not elected. I'm not trying to be a lawyer, but I think they're not elected. So that's why that it makes sense that they can't vote on all this changes in the government, right?
Correct. So
the
even being nominated as NCMP, it doesn't give them that full rights to an MP in the first place. Yeah. And just on that note for NMPs, right? I think NCMP, they don't go into it knowing that they will be NCMP.
Yeah, so it's they apply for the full-time job lah.
Yeah, whereas NMPs, I think they go into it knowing they will be NMPs. There's no way they go into it thinking they are going to be elected, right?
So the difference is that for an NCMP, you go in applying for a full-time job, but you didn't get it, so they offer you the internship at a much lower pay, but of course lesser responsibilities. Whereas NMPs are people that knowingly apply for the internship. Can I say that?
They know the job, right?
They are
is that
for
internship,
NMP,
if you want to say.
Yes.
They're not expecting anything more than that unless they leave the NMP role and go into a political party, which we've seen also.
Yeah, correct. And I'm just talking about the monthly allowance for the NCMP. It's $2,063.
Okay.
Right? So it's the same for the NMP, by the way. So it's $2,063 a month. I think you get a 13-month and a variable component as well, which is the same for all MPs as well. An MP salary is $13,750, right? So 13,750. NCMP is 2,063, right? And I think it's fair for me to say that it's not just about the money, right? But the money surely is one thing, but at $2,000 a month, I think it's fair to say that it's not really a full-time job.
Yeah.
Right? And anyone taking on the NCMP role will probably need to have a day job also. I think right? I'm not going to go into the whole argument about how much
you're exactly right. I went to check I went to just see the annual salary because it includes the additional month of
AVC,
the variable
AVC
bonus,
and a 13-month bonus.
Yeah. So I think the NCMPs, they earn $28,900.
A year.
a year.
Okay.
And then the full elected MP will earn 192,500.
Yeah.
Right. So while as an MP, you can still take on outside roles, right? We know some of them in the parliament still have outside roles.
Okay, just to be clear, you as an MP, you don't need it to be full-time.
Yeah,
you can choose to be full-time though.
Yeah.
Because 13,000 plus a month is the decent salary,
Correct.
right?
So that's just what I'm going to say. It's sufficient if you want to do it full-time.
Correct. And many of them do become full-time.
Yes. But you're also free to take on other roles if you think you have that capacity.
Yeah, but for an NCMP, it's actually, to me, it's a big decision, to take on an NCMP role because your monthly allowance is 2,000. We are talking a lot about the money because the point here is that it's probably not enough to have it as your full-time job. So taking on an NCMP role means you have this job on top of your day job. Right. And it's, I think for many people, it can be a sacrifice, right?
I think it's not just a sacrifice. I think it's really a decision they have to make, whether one, they can do the job part-time, right? Yeah. Because you still have, as an NCMP is quite, I don't know, I'm just saying from my armchair observer perspective, you're up against...
We can ask Andrea Lohande.
You're up against like so many
people.
Incumbents, the ruling party. You need to be well prepared. You need to be over-prepared almost, So they have to decide for themselves whether they are able to do it on a part-time basis.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't have the answer here, but I think for most full-time MP, they get some resources that are given to them in the form of, I think, a assistant or two assistants, if I'm not wrong. I'm not sure if an NCMP gets access to that.
Yeah.
So if you talk about being prepared for parliament, I'm not sure the NCMP candidate will probably have to prepare all these things on their own.
Maybe in future episodes, we could have Andre Loh sitting here instead. The insides of it.
I mean, he's not here. I don't know if he's going to be watching this, but just coming from a guy that's around his age. And I know, it was shared during the election that he has a kid on the way. But there's a lot of commitment in the next 5 years for him, being a new father.
Yep.
Probably will have to have his day job as well as all his parliamentary responsibilities now that he's an NCMP.
Yeah.
Plus, I think he might still be working the grassroots as well.
As an intern gunning for that full-time role, you probably need to work harder compared to, maybe an intern not gunning for the full-time role in that NMP version.
I would say that, we use the whole intern, not trying to slight the role that NCMP
it's just the analogy we were using.
Yeah, but I think as an NCMP, you will be in parliament. You will be expected to speak up on behalf of, and you're an opposition MP. So people will be looking at you to speak up against, government policies and for you to share your views. So I don't think you can be expected to just take a backbench, and be like, some of the MPs that are maybe backbenchers and they're just working the grassroots. Well, I think as an NCMP, you are in parliament specifically to raise issue, to ask questions, seek clarification of the government because you are an opposition MP or opposition NCMP. So you can't afford to just be quiet in parliament.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost like an audition for the full-time role even.
It is. And yes, we talk about whether NCMP is a good training ground for future MP. I personally think it looks like it is a good training ground, right? If you perform well, I think there's some information here like Sylvia Lim, who's currently the Workers' Party chairman, right? And she represents Aljunied GRC today. And she was a NCMP after the 2006 election because they were the best losers, right? So to speak, 43.9% of the vote. It was a close contest in Aljunied GRC back in 2006. And then in 2011, they won the GRC, right? So, you could say that, people saw what she did in parliament and, some people like it. And that got them a little bit more votes in the next election, right? Also on the Workers' Party side, I think two current MPs, Gerald Giam as well as Dennis Tan, they were also NCMP candidates before they joined the winning team for Gerald Giam in Aljunied. And for Dennis Tan, obviously he is representing them at Hougang today.
Yeah, like you said, it is an audition, but we've also seen in the recent election, there were two NCMPs and they were not elected after that. Right? So they're not in parliament anymore. Yeah. So is it a choice on what voters have seen? That the audition maybe works for some, doesn't work for others.
Yeah, I guess, what the NCMP scheme really does is that it gives the opposition candidates, if you will let me explain it in a very layman term, it allows the best opposition candidate that didn't win in the election a chance to showcase what they can bring to parliament. And, 5 years later, if they were to compete in an election, if the voters like what they see, then there's a higher chance they will get more votes. there's been occasion in the past where I think Workers' Party, Lilian, if I'm not wrong, she didn't take on the NCMP seat, even though she could have, it was offered to her, right? Do you think as a voter, you will feel hard done by it? Meaning that, hey, I voted for you, you could have represented me in parliament, but even though you're not elected, but you could have spoken up in parliament only to reject it. Is it fair for voters to feel that way?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question by saying that, the NCMP role is a very public role, right? So understandably, there will be very strong opinions, especially from the public. So I can see merits in the argument you're saying, the residents, had given you that strong support, even though
but he didn't win.
Go over to that mandate. You didn't get that mandate, but you have quite strong support, as the best loser out of all the other constituencies in Singapore. So I can see some people saying that it's only right that you reciprocate that support by taking up the role.
If it's offered to you.
There is a merit in the argument, but I think like we said earlier, right, it's not an easy role to take up. And I would just go on to say that, what if you have a very taxing full-time role? Some full-time roles are more taxing than others, Some full-time roles are more intense than others, right? And
I think some people are also some people are also in a stage in life, like, if you're in your 30s, you got your kid on the way, you have a full-time job, your career, it's a lot, you have a lot on your plate already, compared to, and I'm not saying for sure, but like when you're older and you're more established in your career.
Possibly. I'm saying that you have to also look at that side of the picture and whether it's fair for you to dedicate that amount of time to the role. Maybe someone else on the team could dedicate even more time, right?
Yeah, but I really feel like the NCMP role, to choose to accept it or not to accept it, and in this case, there were, I guess, only a few people that realistically was offered it, from the election round. Andre Low for sure, and then 5% in Tampines GRCs, any of them could have been offered, for at least the Workers' Party could decide. That it feels like it's really also a personal decision to accept it as much as it is a political decision. Because, like I go back to my analogy, right? You applied for a full-time job, you didn't get it, but you were countered with an offer. And whether or not you want that counter offer, sure, some people might look at it as it's still better than nothing. At least you join the company. And then if you perform well, maybe you get promoted in the next election. Others might feel like, hey, you know what? I didn't get the job I applied for. I'm completely within my rights to reject the internship offer because that's not what I applied for.
No, for me, I think like even beyond the fact that, the guy say, hey, I didn't get the job I wanted, even beyond that, there's so many other variables. His family, his existing employer, if he's employed.
Of course.
Whether he even has the time to dedicate.
I just want to say, like, he doesn't really need to dedicate the time to the resident, right?
But like you mentioned, he needs to be on the grassroots as well, right?
Yeah, but you see, the NCMP role doesn't pay him to be the representative for the residents, whether it's an SMC or a GRC, right? Yeah. So they have their own elected representation. And those people are the ones representing them. I would say that, Parliament meets about 30 to 40 days a year. Yes. So that's, and usually on weekdays, just to be clear, they make it clear, so I'm saying that. They usually meet on weekdays. Yeah. So that's about once a week or once every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I will presume you need to like prepare for Parliament if you're actually going to say something.
I don't know about that, but if I'm going to Parliament, I'll be like,
you don't want to say silly stuff, right? And just waste everyone's time.
It's recorded and seen on social media.
Yeah. So you want to give an impressive performance, you want to come in well prepared. And I don't know how much access to information they have, because as I said, I am not sure if they actually have someone helping them or they have to prepare on their own. So there is a lot of commitment as it is already, without even talking about the grassroots activities, which, I guess you are right in saying that they need to be seen as walking the ground also, right? Yeah.
That reciprocal, right? The resident support, you're going to be on the ground there.
Yeah. So
they are the best losers already, so they just need to like flip maybe a few more people who didn't support them, so they should be on the ground.
Yeah. Is it harder to be a good NCMP than a good full-time MP? I'm actually leaning towards I think the NCMP role is actually harder to accept, simply because it comes with a lot of personal commitment. Not to say that an MP role is easy, but that one at least you can be a full-time MP if you want.
If I just look at it objectively, I think there have been MPs who also hold full-time roles.
Yeah.
Right? So, even though they draw a higher salary, they still have full-time roles. As an NCMP, you draw a lower salary. And I think for me, it's just a question on whether you can be fair with your time then, right? Maybe to me, it all boils down to are you able to be fair to the people who voted for you or gave you that best support even though you didn't clinch the mandate? And also you have to be fair to your two other components, your employer and your family.
Yep.
Right? You can't just spend all your time doing work and parliamentary work and then you leave your family for the next 5 years. It's a big sacrifice as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like for me, I feel like if I have the option of being a MP, at least I feel like I can choose to do it full time. I mean, because I can't imagine holding another job and being a full-time an MP because that's really too much for us. For an NCMP, I feel like there's no way that they can just do it full-time.
Yes.
Right. So it's the same as NMP. Most NMPs have full-time jobs, right? So they sign up for an NMP, but they probably hold on to their full-time jobs. And same for NCMP.
I think it all boils down to it. It's more than that 30 to 40 days a year, right?
Yeah.
It's that prep, that walking the ground. Right. It is really can be full-time effort, especially if you're gearing up to the next election.
Yep. And that's really the kind of sacrifice that's probably needed from any candidates taking on the NCMP role. Just wondering, right? Like, do you feel like the NCMP role is also starting to be more diminished today because there's a lot more opposition representation today?
For what I know, the Workers' Party has always said they want that 1/3. So I guess they are also gunning for that 1/3 share. I'm not sure how much is too much, but from their perspective, 10 to 12 is a good win, but maybe not that huge victory that they would have loved. I feel like it gives the people at least that audition, because for me it's quite clear in my mind, the last 5 years they've seen 2 NCMPs in Parliament and that led them to that decision that we've seen at the election.
Yeah, so I just want to just put it out there. So what you're saying is that the PSP, they basically didn't do as well in West Coast as they did the last time.
Yeah. I mean, we can go down into a lot of details on, the boundary lines and all that, but let's not do that. It's just that people have seen them, not just people in West Coast, but maybe people in the redrawn lines as well have seen them, right? And this is what they can deliver. Yeah,
so they actually saw their vote share drop from, I think, 48% plus, like very close to the 50% line to, I think, 40% or 39.9% or something. So that's like quite significant decline, and they had, 2% taking on the NCMP role in the last 5 years. So people do get a chance to at least see them and then they may decide accordingly.
I mean, I hope that's how it works. Yeah, I hope that's how it works.
I think my thoughts are that like the NCMP scheme, it's really accepting it really to me just goes beyond like just go hit the dollars and cents right? So it's really not a job that you take because you like the money, because $2,000 a month is probably not the attractive point to want to be an NCMP. So accepting it really goes beyond just the salary. And, I think what I would think is that it's a very personal decision, right? That it's affected by, or influenced by many other things beyond just political reasons. It could be personal reasons, could be family reasons, could be even employer related reasons.
Fair to all of these other parties as well, right? But for me, I think if I were ever in that position, I think family would be the biggest, because I can't dedicate that full-time effort to one job. I have to, at the minimum, spend part-time effort there and maybe a part-time effort somewhere else.
How about NNP? Would you think that it's something more up your alley, if I may suggest? Because as an NNP, you also have to be in Parliament. You also have to ask questions, hopefully smart questions. But I think what I read is that with a lot of NMPs, they actually represent the
certain
interests or causes that they feel strongly about. So I think in the last batch of NMPs, they had people with disability in Parliament as well. So that represents a part of society that maybe they feel is underrepresented. Is that something that makes sense?
I really haven't done enough research on NMP to the point that...
But it's 2.5 years or so.
Yeah. It's shorter. So it's not a full term. It's half a term, about 2.5 years.
Correct.
And then it's also, I think the Act allows up to 9 if I read somewhere.
Correct. There's a few.
Up to 9. So they're not even using up the full allocation. If I believe in a cause that strongly, maybe the personal finances of Singaporeans, I mean, you go in with that cause in mind already. I don't think you're going in to want to oppose any existing
I think generally with NMPs, it feels like, and when you look at some of the profiles, I mean, we don't have our research in front of us, but just based on memories, you have like sports people also being represented, so they obviously will be able to share more about, how to do, sports related issues in Singapore. People with disability will be another group. So you have representations from different groups of different parts of society. And I think unlike the NCMP, which are clearly they need to be opposition members, as an NMP, you are meant to be neutral, right? So you don't have to side with the government or with the opposition, right? If anything, you owe your responsibility to the cause you represent, right? To speak up for those issues.
And that's why you said, they've come from that very diverse backgrounds, but strong backgrounds in that fields.
All right, and I think we are done with today's episode. We hope you guys learned something about the NCMP scheme from our discussion. As usual, feel free to let us know what you think. Drop us a comment if you're watching it on YouTube, or if you're listening it on Spotify. Just drop us a comment as well, and we'll see you again soon.